Hi there. You're listening to Hypercast, an ADHD podcast. I'm Melissa, an ADHD coach and advocate.
Hi, I'm Brianna, an ADHD coach and soon-to-be therapist. We are here to explore all things ADHD, from unexpected challenges to unique strengths.
Join us as we share insights and strategies that empower you to live your best ADHD life.
Ready? Let's dive into today's episode.
Peace, beauty, joy, love. Those are my guiding lights, as I call them, PBJ and L. Peace, beauty, and joy.
What mindfulness is just being present right here, right now, where you are in your body, where you are in this place and time.
The healing part of self-acceptance is that you stop fighting against yourself and you start working with yourself. And that's where the mindfulness piece comes in.
Today, we're going to start with episode number 1, which is mindfulness and self-acceptance.
Welcome to Hypercast.
Welcome to Hypercast.
We are doing a early Christmas present for you, or a holiday, a seasonal gift. We are doing a 3-part series on mindfulness with Dr. Allan Donsky.
We got a chance to sit down with Dr. Allan Donsky recently to talk about mindfulness, and our conversation was so awesome. We thought it really deserved more than one episode.
So good that we decided to bring it to you in 3 parts. The first episode is on mindfulness and self-acceptance.
Episode 2 is on authenticity and healing.
And the third episode is integration and growth.
Today, we're going to start with episode number 1, which is mindfulness and self-acceptance.
Why is mindfulness and self-acceptance a topic that relates to ADHD?
There is this conception that mindfulness means you're sitting down and you're doing yoga, or you're chanting, you're oming, or you're something. But really what mindfulness is just being present right here, right now, where you are in your body, where you are in this place and time.
To bring a little science, I'll start with self-acceptance. The reason why self-acceptance is so important for people with ADHD is that we have been taught that our natural, authentic selves are not the norm, and that we need to mask and we need to blend in. The healing part of self-acceptance is that you stop fighting against yourself and you start working with yourself. And that's where the mindfulness piece comes in. You have to mindfully do this in a way that works with your brain instead of against it.
It's so important because being able to hone that skill means that we'll be able to better pause before we take an action.
Yeah. So it helps with the impulsivity. It helps with the introspection, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't realize that I am dying of thirst or I'm really hungry. Mindfulness is a key component of that.
Part of self-acceptance is settling in yourself, being calm and collected and confident even in who you are as just yourself. Yes, we have ADHD, but it's not our everything. We are us.
ADHD is the lens through which we view the world, right? It's inextricably linked to us because it is how our brains are formed. It is the differences in our brain structure. But there's nothing inherently bad about that.
Not at all.
And that's where the self-acceptance piece comes in.
We're going to take this opportunity to watch the video. We're watching back as you're watching, and we're going to maybe stop along the way and give some commentary.
In our conversation with Allan about mindfulness and self-acceptance, we came to the understanding that well-being wasn't simply just mental health. It wasn't simply just symptom reduction. All of the therapies that are like, how do we make you less ADHD? That is not healing. That is not health. That is not well-being. As we dive into that topic of what is well-being, how do we use mindfulness to achieve self-acceptance, to improve our well-being, we have to define a few topics first. Allan explains the inner world and how important that is to healing. He will now explain that, and we will give our commentary along the way. Welcome to Hypercast.
Welcome to Hypercast.
I don't know if you can see today, if you're watching instead of just listening, but I have a special guest on my couch today. I am in person with Dr. Allan Donsky, and he is a retired pediatrician and child psychiatrist. He's a very fascinating guy. Tell us a little bit about everything you've been doing recently. You're writing a book as well.
Oh my gosh.
I am indeed. I wanted to follow my heart and my calling from the time I was a kid. I decided to do pediatrics, which I did, and I graduated, and I found myself being very unhappy because it wasn't true self. I had to say to myself, am I going to have a career being a competent but unhappy pediatrician? Or am I going to take more time to do psychiatry, which I did. And I ended up as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I recently retired and I've been doing that for 29 years. What I've learned along the way is that there's more to well-being than just mental health. There's more to mental health than reduction of symptoms if you happen to have a diagnosis. And there's also the important part of all our conversations is how do we flourish as human beings?
Mhm.
How do we become fuller versions of ourselves? How do we become aligned with our inner values? We live in a culture where we're actually not taught to go inwards. Materialism, the consumerism, it's all externally driven. It's somebody else's agenda. And yet we're not taught this in a human curriculum. And so we straddle, interestingly, two worlds. We live in the outer world, the world of action, where we can be seen, we have an identity, a career, we've got friends, but there's the inner world that we straddle. When we look inside ourselves, the first place we arrive at is the mind, typically made up of thoughts and feelings. And the mind is always going. The mind has this constant narrative, and it's commenting. And every thought has a valence, a weight. And it's often critical and judgmental, either of the self or others. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. What if? Why isn't this happening? I messed up, yada, yada. And it's just constantly going. The mind is even going when we have dreams. If we drop in even further, we come to the heart. And the heart has got a rich neurological field. The heart is right at the core, literally the word heart, cœur in French, and the word core, and the word care, and the word charity all have the same root. The heart is the first place where we are often wounded. We get hurt by whatever, our story or the actions or words of other people. Therefore, the heart is also the place of healing, because as they say, no wound, no healing. The third place that we get to when we keep on exploring is even deeper. This is where words begin to fail, because they point at something deep and rich. Now, this inner space has been called different things. It's been called the inner self in the world of depth psychology, Carl Jung, the process of individuation, the self, the person we are continuing to become because we are verbs as much as we are nouns. It's been called the ground of our being, Buddha nature, the soul.
I don't know if you can see my face in this video. I'm like,
I was vibing with him.
you have more of a foothold in this world than I do. And I was thinking of it from the like people who've never studied this. Not
Sure.
like you've done it. I've studied it. There's that difference. So I'm sitting here being like, where are we going? Maybe we could define some of the things because he doesn't define inner world.
A lot of his basis comes from Eastern culture and philosophy. There's the self, and that's like the true you. And then there's the layers of things that shroud the true you. And then there's the external material world. And that's one of the first truths of Buddhism. There's this acknowledgement that there is a world beyond the self, to understand that there is a differentiation between the two. Acknowledgement that there are external factors, and those external factors are not you.
Bringing it back to the ADHD piece, there's that piece of masking. So the outer world is impacting the inner world. And so you lose your authentic self. You lose who you
more
are
that
on the inside because it's masked, it's hidden, you don't know.
It's those layers of things that I was talking about. So there's those layers of things that shroud the true self. In the ADHD world, we literally use the word masking, and that's part of it. Trauma could be part of that. Life experience, stigma, like all of these things can shroud your true self.
Are you talking about the part of you that you are when you're alone? When you
Yeah.
are 100% comfortable, 100% safe?
The 100% safe, the most grounded you can be, when you can take every mask off, when you can take every bit of stigma off, like you take all those outer shells off, and you may, at that point, be close to the center of your being. Mindfulness is a process. It's not just something you automatically do. It's like a workout training for marathon. You don't just run 20 miles from day one. It's something you build up to. It's through this process that you get the opportunity to discover who you are.
Or I will say rediscover, because from the ages of 6 to 13, that is when our brains discover others. So before 6, we are entirely self-centered. Like, we're the main characters of our own story, which is why a lot of the advice you get when you're trying to unmask and trying to learn what is authentic to you, what you actually like, what hasn't been influenced by this outer world, is always, well, think about what you liked in childhood. Go back to what brought you joy as a child. And that's because before that point, there wasn't an outer world to contend with, right? You were living in your inner world. So if you're rediscovering what brings you joy, how to be authentic, how to do mindfulness and self-acceptance, ooh, we're coming full circle.
Yeah.
Then, like, that's part of the healing.
Yeah.
Did we get there?
I think we're getting there. I think a lot of the mindfulness training that Dr. Donsky has gone through are Eastern culture based, especially of the cultures of Buddhism. Some of the things he will talk about kind of fall under the Four Noble Truths. So the first truth is that there is a material world, and that in that material world there is suffering. To understand that we suffer as beings. The third truth is that there is a possibility to have a cessation of that suffering. Is to understand that it doesn't happen overnight, that you actually have to go through a process in your life to find that cessation of suffering in the material world. Yeah.
First truth, material world. Second truth, suffering. Third truth,
Suffering.
Cessation. Fourth truth, process.
That there is a path to discover that cessation or to attain that cessation.
Okay, so there is an outer world. There is suffering in the outer world. You can stop the suffering, but it's a journey to do it.
You are the queen of sum ups. Thank you.
Carl Jung wrote about the soul as the true, authentic, genuine self. The soul takes on another meaning in the monotheistic traditions. This deep place is beyond words, and it is a place of imagination. It is the place of creativity. It is the place of image and fantasy and symbol. The qualities and the energy, the spirit as an energy, not as a thing, that energy and the spirit of this deepest place in us has a certain valence, a certain tone, a certain flavor. It's gentle, it's quiet, it's nourishing, it's peaceful. It's generally the place where we find those deeper practices that we need to heal ourselves and the world. Peace, beauty, joy, love. Those are my guiding lights, as I call them, PBJ and L. Peace, beauty, and joy. You can love your peanut butter and jam too. PBJ and L. It's also the place of compassion and creativity and connection and wonder and awe. And all these aspects of ourselves have a particular flavor and quality. When we're in touch with those aspects that we connect with, and if we're quiet enough and we create a space where the mind can be quiet enough, and that's where mindfulness comes in, those qualities rise up from within and they filter through. They are flavored by the heart.
Why is this practice of uncovering this peace, beauty, joy, and love, why do ADHDers in particular need to do this?
We do have unique things when it comes to our own personal barriers. We have certain stigmas that may shroud us, that cover up our joy, that squash our joy, that squash our happiness, that let us live in that negativity.
How many times in your childhood were you experiencing joy, you're being your free self, and someone said, oh no, stop doing that, stop laughing so loud, be quiet, sit down, sit still, right? So from a young age, when we are forming those connections in our brain and forming who we are as people, we are stomped on. Our joy is being covered in dirt. So there's more likely to be that kind of barrier if you're an ADHDer.
Yeah, we are so good at focusing on the negative.
Yes, it's a protective measure, right? We focus on the negative because the negative prevents us from doing anything that would get us ostracized socially, that would prevent us from receiving help or care or love by being a little bit different, by being a little bit weird. And we need that community around us.
To me, a quiet mind doesn't necessarily mean that it's still and there's nothing happening. To me, a quiet mind means a regulated mind.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that statement. So you're not overstimulated, you're not understimulated, you are in the window of tolerance. And in there, that is where you can have thoughts without them being overpowering or racing. And you can redirect yourself back to like self-reflection, I suppose. Like that's the piece of self-reflection that once it was explained to me, I finally was able to do it. The thoughts are going to come. You can't stop the thoughts, but you notice them. And when you do notice them, without blaming yourself, without any shame, without any guilt, you just redirect yourself back to your former train of thought.
Mindfulness is not about the brain being empty. The point is that you bring yourself back to the present. It's gentle. It's not forceful. I'm getting this vision of Tai Chi where it's very fluid like water.
Tai Chi is great. It's a great example because there is still resistance. It's not like you're just moving through water. There is resistance. And that motion, like having to force or push through something. And that is the part that makes it so healing.
It is so hard when we're confronted with difficult things that we need to go through. And part of this mindfulness and being able to bring the mind back, we can lean towards the negative, but if we can acknowledge and go, yes, I understand that I'm moving towards the negative, but examining it and saying, is that the truth? If not, then bring the mind back to where we are, recenter, and then keep moving. It's a step-by-step process. It's a day-by-day thing, but it's moving through it and dealing with the hard things, but not letting ourselves become so overwhelmed with them. That's bringing mindfulness into the day-to-day practice.
This healing that we've mentioned a few times, it's not always from something that is recognizably broken, right? It's not necessarily some kind of trauma or some kind of depression or anxiety or grief. It could simply just be growing up neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. And the healing is the self-acceptance piece because you weren't being authentic. And authenticity is really important to neurodivergent people. And just that is causing enough distress that this type of healing would be beneficial.
And so those aspects of the deeper self come up through the heart. And then as they rise further, they come to the brain. And the brain's job is to try and put words to it. But those words always fail because they're pointing at something. This is the context in which every human being exists. This is the inner world that we need to come to. It's the world where we are more full. We are more rich. We've got more assets than we ever knew about or were taught about. And that's often been neglected.
Do you mind if I bring it back a little bit to the ADHD-ness of this podcast? What you just spoke about was that everyone could benefit from this, but you yourself have ADHD, correct?
Yes.
Wow.
I was never formally diagnosed.
So when you were talking about your authentic self at the top of the show, you're like, well, I went to medical school. I wanted to be this, but then did I take the time to go back to school and actually do something that aligned more deeply with who I was at my core? Is exploring this process of depth in yourself beneficial in real life?
Absolutely. From the time I was 8 or 9, I knew I wanted to do medicine. I didn't know why. And people have said, how did I decide? And I said, I didn't. It decided for me. The calling is something I couldn't not do, and I couldn't explain it. And I still can't. So I had to follow it. The price of not following it would have been too much. My ADHD, I still have all my school report cards from age 5.5. My report cards were filled with, if Allan learned to curb his talkative habits in classroom, he would incur less wrath from his peers. We know that Allan's a bright boy, but if he only X, Y, Z. If Allan wasn't in a rush to finish, he would make less careless mistakes. You mentioned earlier on, yes, I'm writing a book. The core of the book starts with the most important relationship we'll ever have, the relationship with yourself. As I'm writing the book, I'm thinking about my lens, and I remember being grade 3, 4. And as I look back, I said, how could you expect me as a puppy, as the person who never grows up, who refuses to lose my childhood nature, who's kept his sense of humor and his ability to be humble and to mess up and forgive himself? How can you expect this puppy to be in a classroom of 29 other puppies and not play with them. Like, seriously, it's not my fault you put me with the puppies.
We're not taught to have good relationships with ourselves. We are not conditioned to care about ourselves.
We are not conditioned to be kind to ourselves. We're taught
Correct.
to be critical, right?
Yes.
We're taught in it. That's the unhealthy growth mindset of like, how can I always be more productive? So that is why this healing is so important, and to have a good relationship with yourself, because why would you not want that?
We should be working towards actually being friends with ourselves, like being our own
Yes.
best friend. Yes.
I want to like myself. And if I don't
Yeah.
like myself, then there is something wrong. So that's part of this mindfulness, this self-acceptance journey that we're going on.
So us with ADHD, we're energetic. We like to move. When the concept of mindfulness comes up, many of us put the brakes on and go, you've got to be kidding me. Because mindfulness means I need to sit down, I need to meditate. That's impossible for me in my ADHD brain. How can we, as people with ADHD, bring this concept of mindfulness into our lives in a way that makes sense to us?
Yes. Let me go back to my first teacher with mindfulness, and that was John Kabat-Zinn. He said it's moment to moment, on purpose, non-judgmental awareness by paying attention. Now, attention is a skill that everybody has. People who've got ADHD like I did, it was more interesting to sit and chat with my friends than learn math. Once I'd done it, I got bored very easily. Boredom is actually an invitation to get engaged in something. When ADHD people say they're bored, they're not engaged with something that's interesting to them.
Boredom is actually an invitation to get engaged in something. That boredom is an invitation. I love that thought. It gave boredom form.
When you reframe it the way Allan just did, boredom is an invitation to get engaged with something. It takes the distress away from boredom.
It makes it active, which I really like.
Yeah.
Many folks with ADHD are at least of average or above average intelligence. And so keep me engaged, keep me interested. Give me something that I can do. Because if you don't give it to me as a kid, I'm going to find it with whatever's available. And that will not be socially acceptable. Mindfulness, though, mindfulness on purpose, moment to moment. There's studies which show that ADHD folks can practice the attention muscle, practicing attention like flexing the biceps. It takes practice. The mind goes off and you bring your mind back without judgment. The mind goes off, you bring it back.
So you're talking about neuroplasticity then, because we know that people with ADHD, it's not a lack of attention because we have that hyper-focus piece. So it's the variability of attention. It needs to be interest-based. But if we practice through mindfulness, our attention, it creates this neuroplastic change in our brains, which then promotes healing, promotes access to the deeper core, trying to tie it back to what you were talking about.
Yes. And mindfulness, and it took me a while to get this, and I'll highlight this. Mindfulness is not staying focused on one object. We can't. The mind goes off. It does its stuff. It's like clouds passing in the sky.
But that's that non-judgment piece you were also
That's
mentioning.
the non-judgment piece. Once the mind goes off, even if your mind's been off for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, the moment you notice it's off, that's the moment of mindfulness. Oh, my mind is somewhere I don't want it to be. You bring it back. You bring it back again. One of the retreats that I've been on, mindfulness retreats for a week, silent, the only instruction we had for the entire week, if you have a thought, notice it and bring your attention back to the breath. It's that refocusing. Mindfulness is not about holding a single focus, which is impossible. It's not about emptying your mind. It's not about sitting still. It's not about finding a point of bliss. It's not religious. And it's no more Buddhist than charity is Christian.
Bringing it back to the breath, a specific instruction that's great for our brains, because just noticing and then bringing it back to what? Bringing it back to the breath. Something that you do naturally. You breathe all the time. You're already good at it. Yeah, right.
Have you done any Ujjayi breath exercises before?
Can you explain?
Sure. It's a yogic practice that, how do I explain this? Jaya breathing is about inhaling deeply, but it's not just like breathing. It's like listening to the sound of your breath. It's feeling where it goes in your body.
Oh, I
So,
love that somatic practice, feeling
yeah,
where the breath is, because sometimes it's hard to bring yourself back to just breathing. But if you can be like breathing, be like, oh, I feel it here, I feel it here, I feel it here. That is another key component of mindfulness.
yes. And then it's active, it's engaging the senses and it's engaging the inner self. I do these breathing exercises where I actually work on breathing timing. I count and see how long it takes for me to fill my lungs and then see how long it will take to get all the air out. At the
Yeah.
same time, I'm focusing and listening to my breathing and I'm
Okay.
feeling it in my body. And I do it while lying on the floor, which is so good because I love good floor time.
I also love good floor time. I'm going to bring some science into what you just said because it is
Yeah.
brilliant. You're bringing in multiple senses, which is huge for mindfulness and engaging the brain and distracting it from the distracting thoughts, right? Like that's all we want to do, just distract our brains in a purposeful way, right? So if you are engaging more than one sense, you're doing great. That counting is another piece that is engaging both sides of your brain at the same time, right? That creativity and then the logical side. So that's another great way to distract your brain. And then as what you said is floor time, that is very grounding. There's a lot of spiritual connections to groundedness, like indigenous healing, tribal healing, being connected to earth, to nature, to the world, right? And that could mean community, that could mean society, is also a really healing piece in and of itself that's important to that overall healing. So you've had 3 pieces in one breathing exercise in. Yes, I love that.
So it's that practice, practice, practice. There's 3 kinds of mindfulness practices. There's informal practice. You're walking around. You're noticing the aisles when you're in the grocery store. You're standing in line. You notice you're impatient. There's a moment of mindfulness. What's called for? Where am I stuck? My 2 favorite questions. Where am I stuck? What's called for? Standing in the line, you're getting irritated because you weren't planning on having 5 people in front of you. I'm impatient. That's the mindfulness moment. Hidden in the concern or the complaint or the issue or the unpleasant emotion is the direction for you to choose to go. The moment I notice I'm impatient, my hand is on the door of patience. The moment I notice I'm hungry, my hand is on the door of I need to eat. And so hidden in every complaint is actually the desire.
This is the last line for this
Yeah.
episode.
So let's talk about that. Hidden in the complaint is the desire. This is cognitive reframing. It's taking a thought that is causing harm or distress and turning it into a strength. What he's doing is noticing and then turning the noticing into a strength, into something that gives you your power back. Your power is being taken from you because something was wrong, you were impatient, or something was hurting you, or you were hungry, and you weren't in control of that. It was something that was affecting you.
And it's
what
also
he
making
says-
it actionable. So if,
Yeah,
and
that's what
every
I'm saying.
complaint is actually the desire to do something. And that gives you power. That puts power
Yes.
in your hands.
Like
Yeah.
I said, taking control back to help yourself rather than just being hurt.
Amen, sister.
So in this episode, we're talking about mindfulness and self-acceptance. As we go further into this conversation with Allan, we get deeper into the growth and the integration and the healing components of it.
That next step is that authenticity and healing piece. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in episode 2.
In order to understand the concepts of mindfulness and self-acceptance, we had to understand the concept of the inner world. Hopefully, we explained that in a way that's understandable. Then we also talked about how you can use mindfulness and cognitive reframing to take power back, control your life, remove distress, and promote healing.
And be more comfortable and confident in your own skin.
Yes, very important.
Yeah.
And that comfortable in your own skin, learning to like yourself,
And be your own friend.
be your own friend. We talk more about that in episode 2 when we talk about authenticity and healing.
Episode 2 will be airing next week. Until then, bye. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Hypercast.
If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected, be sure to rate and subscribe. And check out the show notes for links to our social media and websites.
Whether you're seeking practical tips, heartfelt stories, or just a sense of community, Hypercast is here for you.
Remember, you're not alone in your ADHD journey. Together, we can navigate the highs and lows with courage and compassion.
So until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing your unique neurodiversity.
Catch you on the next episode of Hypercast.